When I was 17, my parents let me and four of my closest friends spend a week alone at our family's old, rustic cabin on a lake in rural Wisconsin. The cabin was isolated, at the end of a long dirt road, and the lake was dark and deep. The centerpiece of the property was a long, rickety wooden dock that stretched about 50 feet out into the black water. On the third night of our trip, the heat was suffocating. It was a thick, humid, moonless night, and the air was perfectly still. We had spent the evening around a bonfire, but the heat became too much to bear. Around midnight, my friend Josh had an idea. "Let's go for a swim," he said. "It'll be epic." It seemed like a great idea. We all stripped down to our shorts and ran down to the dock, our footsteps thudding on the old wood. The lake was a sheet of black glass, reflecting the brilliant stars above. We cannonballed in, one after the other, the shockingly cold water a welcome relief from the oppressive humidity. We swam around for about 10 minutes, laughing and splashing, feeling the freedom of being teenagers alone in the wilderness. I was treading water near the end of the dock when I heard it. It was a low, soft humming sound. It seemed to be coming from directly beneath me, from under the dock. "Do you guys hear that?" I asked, my voice suddenly quiet. Everyone stopped splashing. We all listened. The humming was faint, but undeniable. It was a low, resonant, almost melodic sound, but there was something unnatural about it. "It's probably just the water moving against the pilings," my friend Chloe suggested, though she sounded uncertain. Then my friend Mike, who was closest to the dock, let out a terrified gasp. "Something touched my leg," he whispered, his voice cracking. "It was smooth and cold." That was all it took. A wave of primal fear washed over us. The dark water, which had been a source of relief moments before, now felt like a sinister, living entity. We all scrambled for the dock's ladder in a frantic, panicked chaos. We pulled ourselves out of the water, our hearts hammering, and huddled together in the middle of the dock, breathing heavily and staring down into the black abyss we had just escaped. For a long time, there was nothing but the sound of the crickets. We were starting to feel foolish, our adrenaline fading. Then we saw the movement. Faint, pale, vaguely glowing shapes were moving in the deep water beneath the dock. They weren't fish. They were too large, and they moved with a slow, deliberate grace that was utterly wrong. There were at least half a dozen of them, swimming in a slow, circular pattern directly under us. As our eyes adjusted, we could make out more detail. They were long and humanoid, with pale, almost translucent skin. They had no discernible features, just smooth, vaguely human forms. We were paralyzed, watching the silent, ghostly ballet unfold in the depths. Then one of the shapes broke from the circle and swam directly towards one of the thick wooden pilings that held up the dock. It reached out with a long, thin arm. We heard a soft, wet, scraping sound. It was trying to climb. Another one followed, and then another. We could hear them now, scraping and clawing at the submerged wood of the pilings, their wet bodies bumping against the underside of the dock right beneath our feet. The gentle humming sound started again, louder this time, seeming to vibrate up through the wood. They knew we were there. They wanted to get out of the water. We didn't wait to see if they would succeed. We ran. We sprinted the length of that rickety dock as fast as we could, not daring to look back. We burst into the cabin, locked the doors, and barricaded them with furniture. We spent the rest of the night huddled in the living room, listening to the sound of wet scraping and soft thuds against the cabin's foundation, which sat right at the water's edge. The sounds finally stopped at dawn. We packed our things and left that morning, 4 days early. I've never been able to swim in a lake at night again. I can't shake the image of those pale, silent shapes in the dark water, or the horrifying sound of their long, thin fingers trying to find purchase on the wood beneath my feet.
I grew up in rural Iowa, and I know the sounds of a country night better than I know my own heartbeat. I know the sound of the wind in the corn, the chirp of crickets, the call of a distant howl. But one night, I heard a sound that didn't belong, and it haunts me to this day. I was 19, driving home from my girlfriend's house. It was a hot, sticky night in late August. My route took me down a long, narrow gravel road, a shortcut that was flanked on both sides by endless fields of corn which stood over 8 feet tall, forming a dense, impenetrable wall of green in my headlights. My car, a notoriously unreliable Ford Escort, chose that exact moment to die. The engine sputtered, coughed, and went silent. I was stranded. It was about 1 a.m., and my phone, of course, had no signal. My only option was to start walking. The nearest farmhouse, the Miller's place, was about 2 miles down the road. I got out of the car, and the sound of the summer night washed over me. The cicadas were deafening, a high-pitched, electric hum that seemed to make the humid air vibrate. I started walking, the crunch of my boots on the gravel, the only sound that broke the insectile symphony. I had been walking for about 10 minutes when the cicadas on the right side of the road suddenly went silent. The abrupt quiet was jarring. I stopped, a prickle of unease on the back of my neck, and in that sudden pocket of silence I heard a new sound. It was a loud, rhythmic rustling in the corn, moving parallel to me. It wasn't the sound of the wind. The air was dead still. It sounded like something large, something heavy, was moving through the stalks just inside the field, hidden from view. I stood there, frozen, listening. The rustling stopped. The silence stretched. I took a hesitant step forward on the gravel. Instantly, the rustling in the corn started again, a single, sharp crash of stalks. It had moved when I moved. My heart began to pound. I started walking again, faster this time. The rustling kept pace, always just to my right, always hidden by the wall of corn. It was like walking next to a ghost that I could only hear. I stopped again. It stopped again. This was not an animal. An animal would have run off or ignored me. This thing was stalking me. It was matching my every move. I decided to run. The second my feet started pounding the gravel, the rustling exploded into a frantic, violent crashing. The sound was terrifying. It wasn't just one thing. It sounded like multiple large bodies tearing through the cornfield with incredible speed, easily keeping pace with my desperate sprint. I ran harder than I have ever run in my life, my lungs on fire, a raw scream of terror caught in my throat. I didn't dare look into the corn. I was afraid of what I might see in a moonlit gap between the stalks. I could see the faint yard light of the Miller's farmhouse ahead, a tiny beacon of hope. The crashing in the corn was right beside me now, so close I could hear the snapping of stalks and a low, guttural breathing sound. I made it to the edge of the cornfield and burst onto the Miller's long driveway, sprinting for the house. The second my feet hit their lawn, the sounds from the cornfield stopped. Not gradually, but instantly. The frantic crashing ceased, and the deafening chorus of the cicadas immediately resumed, as if a switch had been flipped. I hammered on the Miller's door until old Mr. Miller came out with a shotgun. I was hysterical, babbling about being chased. He, a man who had lived his whole life by those fields, just looked at me with a calm, grim expression. He went back inside and came back with a set of car keys. "The corn is tall this time of year," was all he said, his voice low. "You shouldn't walk the roads at night. Some things that wander the roads don't like being disturbed." He drove me back to my car, which, of course, started right up on the first try. I never took that shortcut again. But sometimes, when I'm driving past a cornfield at night, I turn my radio off and I listen. And I pray that the only thing I hear is the wind.
When I was 16, my parents went away for a weekend to celebrate their anniversary, leaving me home alone for the very first time. I was thrilled. I had the entire house to myself, a typical suburban 2-story in a quiet, manicured cul-de-sac, where the biggest event of the week was garbage day. Our house was at the end of the street, with a large, fenced-in backyard that had a stone patio and a nice deck. It was the epitome of suburban safety. It was a sweltering Saturday night in July. The air was thick and humid, so heavy it felt like you could taste it, and the relentless symphony of cicadas was the only sound. To combat the oppressive heat, I had all the windows in the house open, hoping for a breeze that never came. I was in the living room, which is at the back of the house, watching a movie with the lights off. The only illumination came from the flickering TV screen, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Around 11 p.m., I heard a sound from the backyard that cut through the movie's dialogue. It was a soft, rhythmic creak, creak, creak. I muted the TV and listened intently, my body suddenly tense. It was the unmistakable sound of someone sitting in one of our old metal lawn chairs, the kind that rocks back and forth. My first thought was the wind, but the sound was too steady, too deliberate, and evenly paced. My mind raced through other rationalizations, a branch, the house settling, but I knew none of them fit. My heart started to beat a little faster, a low thud against my ribs. I crept over to the sliding glass door that led to the patio and peered through a narrow gap in the vertical blinds. The backyard was dark, but the moon was bright enough to cast a pale, silvery light over the lawn, and what I saw made my breath catch in my throat. There was a man sitting in one of the lawn chairs on the patio. He was just a silhouette, but I could tell he was large, broad-shouldered. He was facing the house, rocking back and forth, slowly, methodically, his head tilted slightly as if he were listening. I had never seen him before. He wasn't one of our neighbors. I ducked down below the window, my mind a frantic scramble of disbelief and terror. Was he a burglar? Why wasn't he trying to be quiet? Why was he just sitting there, announcing his presence with that ceaseless, unnerving creak? I crawled on my hands and knees to the phone in the kitchen and dialed 911, whispering to the dispatcher what was happening, my voice trembling so hard I could barely form the words. I stayed on the line with her, crouched on the cool linoleum of the kitchen floor, my eyes glued to the bottom of the sliding glass door. The gentle, horrifying creaking never stopped. When the distant wail of a siren grew closer and a police car's headlights finally swept across the front of the house, the creaking stopped abruptly. I ran to let the officers in, my relief so profound it almost made my knees buckle. They were professional, but I could sense their slight dismissiveness. They went through the house and into the backyard with their powerful flashlights. The man was gone. But the lawn chair was still there, in the middle of the patio, gently rocking back and forth in the humid air, as if he had just gotten up. The police found no signs of forced entry, no footprints in the manicured lawn. They treated me kindly, but ultimately concluded it was likely a prank or a drunk who had wandered into the wrong yard and passed out for a bit. "Just keep the doors locked, miss," one of them said, before they left. I didn't sleep that night. The house no longer felt like a safe haven. It felt like a cage he could observe at his leisure. The next day, Sunday, I was a nervous wreck. I spent the day jumping at every sound, keeping the blinds closed. As evening approached, a thick dread settled over me. I considered calling a friend to come over, but talked myself out of it. What would I say? That I was scared of a man who just sat in a chair? I locked all the windows and doors, despite the suffocating heat. I sat in the living room, trying to read a book, but the words just swam in front of my eyes. All my senses were focused on the backyard, waiting. Around 10:30 p.m., I heard it again. Creak, creak, creak. A wave of pure, cold terror washed over me. He was back. My body started to tremble uncontrollably. Forcing myself to move, I crawled to the window and looked through the blinds, expecting to see him on the patio. But the patio was empty. The sound was closer. My eyes followed the sound and my stomach dropped with such force it felt like I was falling. The lawn chair was no longer on the patio. It had been moved. It was now sitting in the middle of the grass, directly outside my living room window, less than 5 feet from where I was standing. And he was in it, rocking back and forth, his dark shape almost pressed against the glass. He wasn't just watching the house anymore, he was watching me. In the faint glow from the TV, I could see the glint of his eyes, fixed on the window, on the very spot where I was hiding. I scrambled backward, a silent scream trapped in my throat. This time, I didn't call the police. I knew he would be gone before they arrived. This was personal. This was a message. I ran upstairs to my parents' bedroom at the front of the house, locked the door, and hid in their walk-in closet, burying myself under a pile of clothes. I sat there in the dark for the rest of the night, listening to the ceaseless, rhythmic creaking from the yard below, a sound that etched itself into my soul. At one point, I thought I heard him humming a low, tuneless melody. My parents came home the next afternoon. I tried to act normal, but I couldn't stop looking out the back window. I never told them the full story. I knew they wouldn't believe me, or that their fear would only amplify my own. But the lawn chair was still there, sitting alone in the middle of the grass, a silent testament to my terror. A few days later, my dad, annoyed, moved it back to the patio. The next morning, it was back by the window. We all saw it. My dad called the police that time. They found nothing. But after that, my parents believed me. We sold the house 6 months later. But I'll never forget the feeling of being watched, or the simple, horrifying sound of a man in a lawn chair patiently rocking in the dark.